Okay, folks, so this is a song called Cosmic Dope Slap, and the chords do that. And what you're hearing was recorded using this lovely Fender guitar, which belongs to my wife, Tina. And at some point here, I'm going to be bringing in my lovely Telecaster here through this little pedal board that I've gotten very close to not needing to change stuff on, and then it'll go into that Fender Acoustasonic amp here, which I really like. 2 channels, it's great. I can run vocals through it and stuff. And there's my trusty old Ditto looper, which contains the acoustic guitar track. And look what Tina found at the Goodwill. Yeah, you got that right. How many of y'all got a fart piano? Life's little pleasures. All right, let's get this going here. So, at any rate, what I'm trying to do today, I guess that'll do it. I always cut my own head off whenever I do one of these videos. But anyhow, yeah, credit where credit is due. Today, I want to kind of do a shout out to my friend Bob Jordan, right? Who is back living in Massachusetts again, in a very, kind of rural and slow part of Massachusetts out there near Ashburnham, I guess, which is where I did my student teaching at the middle school, high school there, Ashburnham, Westminster, many years ago. The guy who was my mentor teacher's name was Jim Mullins. He was pretty hip. He was definitely a product of the 1960s, it seems to me. Pretty neat school. Remember, there was I think he taught chemistry or biology, this really muscly fella whose last name was Plum. I don't remember. It was a Greek name. Who had a heart attack while running on a treadmill. Honest to God, all this fitness stuff, is it really worth it? Is it worth the trade-off, for just food that tastes good and, time spent doing something other than going to the Y? Good Lord. That was a fun experience. My kids, all of those kids that I student taught, 3 different classes read the book Death Be Not Proud, and each student submitted a drawing and a quote from the book that was some part in it that was numinous to them, that sort of stood out and was memorable in some way, and we compiled those books. Thought they might be in this room. We compiled those things in in the order of the narrative, and bound them, and that was a pretty cool high school thing. But anyways, I want to talk about Bob Jordan. Who's Bob Jordan? Bob Jordan is this guy that I first met at the Worcester Artist Group when it was on Harlow Street there, and in Worcester, Massachusetts. and he, I don't know, he appeared to me to kind of be like an MC or like this sort of elder, regional elder that was real creative and wacky and pleasant and, didn't, of course, everybody has favorites, but with Bob, if you were willing to go to the WAG and get up on stage and do something, it was already good. And he was real edifying to a whole mess of people. And I cannot even begin to enumerate how many people have talked to me over the years and said that Bob was, just like this big brother, this aesthetic kin kind of person that was there for him at a good time, and the same true for me. And actually, I might have met him when he was working at that old music store, McDuff's, in Worcester, that was like this old house on a busy commercial 4 or 6 lane strip that came out of the side of Worcester. I think it went towards Shrewsbury and Framingham sort of direction. And there was this store that had been there for decades, and McDuff's, and Bob ran it for whoever McDuff was, or the owner of the business. And I remember the first time I walked in there, I thought, my God, this place needs a good dusting. And the windows do not admit much light. But there was Bob, and I forget who else was in there. I think Eddie Barnett once said it was him when he was about, 15 years old, because he used to hang out there with Bob. And I went in and looked around in a couple of these rooms. Remember, it's laid out like it's in a house. It's in a house that was probably built in the 1890s or something. A couple 3-decker house, 2-decker house. I was amazed at the strange guitars that I saw hanging on the walls in there that went back, all kinds of strange stuff. Tedesco's from Japan, Harmonies, Hagstrom's, Vox, and this wasn't the kind of place that had them, that was terrifically concerned with whether there were blemishes or anything. I mean, all the instruments I saw in McDuff's were used, and some of them quite visibly so, But the cool thing about Bob was that he knew how to get stuff going. He knew. I mean, he modifies his own guitars, and has these disciplines that simplify things, like this. I remember when he just took the controls out of this hollow body electric guitar, and all that was left was just plug it in. It doesn't need any kind of anything. I just want to do these songs and know that when I plug it in into that amp, it'll do what I hear at home. And he still does that. And this is 35 years ago that I was just learning some of these things from him. So anyways, he was probably around before Hipbone or Progress started, when I first was meeting Pete Zolli and Keith and Jeff and those guys. He saw, and he curated local live talent, and it wasn't all musical. We had poets, spoken word artists, people that would attach, like Mark Polini, contact mics to things like metal grocery carts and yield signs and stuff, and do these multimedia little 1-act 10-minute things that were really interesting. And if there were somebody in town touring that was a band of note within certain circles back then, Bob was a real go-to guy for booking in New England. I know that, I went to a Glenn Phillips concert. Bob booked it at Gilrain's. I went to a Chris Thomas, what the hell was his band called? Something like the Third It'll come to me. When Jack Wright and his son Ben were both there, Bob booked that. And I got to plug in my guitar in the back of the room. The stage was too full of people to admit one more musician, so I just went to the back of the room where there was an outlet and plugged in and got to watch all of them and see what they were doing and jam along with them at the Space down there in Worcester one time. That was fun. Bob booked that. Bob mentored people like Julian Russell along, who became a really quite accomplished fingerstyle acoustic guitarist with all kinds of extended techniques. And Julian was sort of a child of Windham Hill Records in some ways. It seems to me that a lot of what Julian was doing, I think he'd probably heard people like Michael Hedges and some of those cats that were recording real complex acoustic stuff back then. Bob booked the Chandler Travis Philharmonic up at Green Hill Park and booked me to open for him. It was amazing. Michael Hurley concert, same venue. Bob booked it. Eugene Chadbourne in many of his various bands over the years. I really could go on and on. A lot of stuff, I remember Bob came up to play at a place in Fitchburg called, I think it was called Eco Village, coffee house with a bakery in it, that Hipbone had established kind of a live thing. They were open to music, and so Bob came up and played. It was great. He's fabulous. He's a curator of so many songs that people should hear, and plays them with incredible sincerity, and like he inhabits the songs he does while he does them, and he really is a storyteller, and he's a fabulous improviser. Regardless of what instrument you hand him, he'll find a way to make it a good thing, with what's going on. Bob invited me to join the Invented Thing Quartet, and there were already 4 members. And so there were 5 of us, but we were the Invented Thing Quartet. The ITQ, I've got the CD in the other room in there. I think it's called 10 YRS, 10 years. And I think I played out with them a couple times, and we did a live radio show with Mark Polini on WCUW at Clark University one time that I could tell you stories about. Bob taught me to improvise. I had been spending most of the preceding 8 years getting super OCD and complex and composerly, as it were, when I was in the service and traveling all over the place, because I couldn't be in bands. I was too itinerant. My whole life has been too itinerant, but it was especially itinerant when I was in the Navy, just always on the go for little fixed periods of time, and then somewhere else. Bands that doesn't happen. So I had a 4-track cassette X15 Fostex multi-track deck back then, and I was just going deep like a music composition grad student with. Right here I have 2 Korean apothecary chests that have a whole lot of drawers in them. They're completely full of recordings from like 83 to 92 that I was doing back then. We used to call that stuff dinner music for the bulimic. And I got scores of it reviewed in some of the indie mags that were around back in the 80s and 90s, and I'm happy to report that more than 50% of the reviews were positive. And many of them were amusing, and some of the people kind of liked how stark and well, I was in the service after all. Some of it was pretty militaristic, and maybe took the John Philip Sousa stuff that I had learned when I was a band kid to a kind of Glenn Branca place. I don't know. I got compared to people like Glenn Branca and Nels Klein, Fred Frith, Eugene, when I was doing weird stuff with acoustic instruments. Although those guys are heroes to me, I think those are accidental comparisons mostly. You know, people always grabbing for something familiar to people like familiarity. But back to Bob Jordan, so Bob comes up to the Eco Village in Fitchburg, great gig, and I had one of my homemade strange electronic stringed instruments in the car. I think it was called the Howler, and I went in and gave it to him for some reason, and it's a real strange gift to give to somebody that you just kind of don't know, but had a feeling that he could find a use for it. And gosh, within about a year of that, I'd been going down to Worcester often enough that I got to know him better, and we started jamming at his house on some stuff, and I remember him having recording equipment, all kinds of cool stuff at his house in Grafton, and on a number of occasions somebody else or other people would show up, and it would turn into a real living room happening, a real interesting sonic happening. Many good times jabbing at Bob's house. He helped out on a number of recordings of mine. He's all over the No More Bandages record. Pete Zolli brought him in for the real nice, clean production of some of my tunes that he did to come in and play his 12-string Portuguese guitarra on it. And Bob was very generous in offering me instruments he wasn't using that I might like to purchase, such as this Casio electronic guitar from the 80s that showed up on a couple of tunes on my Finding Grace record. It's all over. No, wait a minute. No, it cropped up on Hipbone's Decoupage record on Stereo Bird Nests. It's really quite prominent in that song, and it's cool. It's real cheesy and Casio-ish, but it's kind of great too. And there's another song where I use it to kind of emulate like the sound of like a baseball park organ. It can do that real cheesy, cheap Sears organ sound. It can do that, with guitar fretting techniques on it and stuff. I got that from Bob. Bob introduced me to Peter Cashman, from whom I got a couple of instruments, including that solid oak electric mandolin that I gave to my friend Dennis James. And plus, Bob's just been a real friend all these years. He really is the most unassuming and not demanding person I know. And like all of our best friends, he's the kind of person where, if you call him up and you got something that you'd really like to talk about, it's as though you were just talking a minute ago and the conversation is just continuing. And of course, I really love people like that, where, because like I said, when you're itinerant, you move around a lot, you end up really far away from anybody that you may have grown up with, and stuff like that. So anyways, oh yeah, I forgot to mention Bob and I also did, probably 3 improvised duets records back in the early aughts when I was doing that Instrumentales Improvised Duets series that I think had 32 different collaborations with 24 people, you know. I remember Fred Hall, rest in peace, he and I did 3 of them. Bob and I think, did 3. Yeah, they're the 2 guys that we did the most of those with. Of course, Bob is married to the wonderful Lisa Dawson-Back Clayman, a amazing music mind and historical researcher in Central New York, and knows a lot more about where I come from than I do, as far as music, orchestral and so forth, jazz bands and things from back in the 1900 to like 1930, kind of seems to be her zone and stuff. So I got to give Lisa a shout out because, you know, I'm glad she and Bob found each other. They're a pretty cool match, you know, and stuff. And they're doing the grandma and grandpa stuff now, and living in the country up there in central Massachusetts. And you know, me and him are both getting long in the tooth and stuff. But I wanted to do this video just to say thanks to Bob Jordan for giving me opportunities, and for being just sort of like giving me a doctoral level education in having fun improvising and doing it with both of these and these involved enough that synchrony and entrainment and stuff can happen. Got all that from Bob. All right, happy trails.